So the title of this morning's Dharma talk is just some letters. AFZ. AFZ. Only one person has guessed that. And wasn't that you? Because my wife hangs around me a lot, so she probably didn't really guess. Probably absorbed it somehow. So AFZ, I thought about the whole title and I thought, well, I'll do this and make it more, as Mayun said in response from France this morning, that's very mysterious, something like that. So anyway, and it's, I want to use that kind of a idea to help develop this. I have no idea what I'll say because I don't plan, hardly, a little bit sometimes. Awareness-free zones. So awareness-free zones. And the idea there with awareness-free zones is as long as you're receiving, mainly awareness. There probably isn't an area that's totally awareness-free unless you're sleeping. And of course, then there's dreaming, which is never another level of awareness. So probably in sleep, probably things shut down quite a bit there. On the other hand, well, what do we assume about that? We assume that our awareness is something that we do or that is happening. We have some say-so about. And actually, awareness could be happening just because your conscious mind is not there. Doesn't mean that there isn't an awareness, a kind of awareness in your digestive tract. In that part of the awareness that senses your body temperature. In that part of your awareness that, I could go on and on further, but I don't have the medical terms, but there's probably a lot there. And different people have different levels. You're actually born with different levels of awareness based on what? Causes and conditions. Please don't ignore causes and conditions. If you think you've got it down, you haven't. That's of course, not going to point, but I mean, you'll do it because the causes and conditions that you have been trying to ignore are taking you that way. It's like jumping in a river and saying, go the other way. Probably not going to work. I think there was a book on meditation, maybe one of the first books I ever read on meditation back in the 60s, I guess, by someone by the name of Barry Stevens called, it wasn't Go That Way. It was, what was the name of that book? I don't remember. It was a pretty interesting book, but it was about, used an image of the river and just go the way the river flows. Pardon me. But just the idea of awareness-free zones, that idea will help you move into your own understanding, your own meditation practice, your own, the way I've been characterizing it is receiving and producing. Receiving is receiving whatever's happening, sound, smells, taste, touch, thoughts, receiving. Please receive as much as you can. How do you do that? You train yourself to receive by sitting down, holding still, and it's basically voluntary suffering. You sit down and you volunteer to receive whatever arises, no matter what it is, without compliment, without saying anything about it, without shutting it down, without turning it into an awareness-free zone, by coming to a conclusion. It makes me want to use epithets because it's so over here, and at one time it was completely dark. But just because something is clear over here doesn't mean you're ready to hear about it. I sometimes say to people, especially students who are SC, semi-clear, or, I'm not going to go there. So we tend to think because we're not done through completing working on ourselves yet, we're all about sharing our knowledge with somebody else. In other words, trying to get people to do what we think they should do. because we're tired of looking at ourselves and being confused by not knowing what to do. So someone else comes along with a problem, we immediately want to traipse right into their territory, even though the boundaries are obvious, and start telling them, well, maybe you should try this. We'll try that, try this. And don't try anything. I get to say that to you because of this structure, the structure of you came here to hear a Dharma talk. Dharma means law. I am not omnipotent or, really speaking, what the Buddha was. He did what he did. I'm doing what I'm doing. You're doing what you're doing. But be aware of it. Don't make assumptions. Don't necessarily buy into the idea of who you are and what you are and what's going on. And don't buy it. Don't sell it. You could say, to be very direct, you could say, give up the marketing mentality about everything. Tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. There's some of that going on, which we can't move away from. So anytime you're producing, anytime you're talking, just like right now, I want faces, sounds, and I somewhat receive what is arising in my own mind, and I'll share a little bit, which I don't often do. Is I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. That's what shows up. But since the self-centeredness is at a minimum, I don't really need to know. This is not information. And if you think it's informative, you're missing the point. And if you don't understand, you should ask questions. Thank you.
What is the function of a Dharma talk, if not, or in addition to information?
Just to help you, because quite often a Dharma talk, if it's a good Dharma talk, will be pointing at something that most people who come to a Dharma talk are trying to see, but are not sure how to actually do that. They're still trying to figure it out. How many times have you said, I got to figure this out in the last week? If you say that, you might as well be putting a canvas tarpaulin over your head, because you can't figure this out. I'm not saying you can't figure out how to fix a flat. Call AAA until you fix a flat. But you probably aren't going to be able to figure out because all of the gaps and spaces and distances and interstices between the thought patterns, mixing it up in the consciousness, are so completely elaborate, and they are dependently arisen. There is no self in the skandhas. There's no other anywhere. There isn't anything else. There isn't anything else. Don't believe a word I say. If you believe it, that's a misunderstanding. Investigate everything. If you can find out somebody who has or somebody who can, take your time. But don't take too much time. Death comes without warning. This body will be a corpse. At that time, the Dharma will be your only help. And if you haven't practiced the Dharma, you're pretty much screwed from the point of view of relative truth. As the Trungpa Rinpoche said, some people will die soon, others will die later. That's it. That's the truth. Everything. Death comes without warning. Not nihilistic, just truth. Just the truth. It's the truth. We need the truth as much as we can get of it, relative and ultimate. If you have not looked at relative truth, very difficult to understand what ultimate truth is. Ultimate truth, relative truth is kind of an understanding, this kind, but ultimate truth doesn't have any polarized dynamics in it.
I had another question earlier. You said that we're born because of causes and conditions with different levels of awareness. And I was wondering what the relationship between our degree of awareness and realization is.
So you want to know how far away it is?
If those that are born with more awareness are at an advantage to see the truth.
So advantage, there may be advantage, but it's not worth looking at or evaluating. You need to be responsible. The ability to respond, I'll break it down for you. Responsibility is not about blame. It's not about you. It was your responsibility. You should have taken care of that. You said you were going to do that. You didn't do it. It's not that. A little bit of that, but we tend to convert that into some kind of a ability to accuse and blame, or credit for that matter. It was your responsibility. You took care of it. Good on you. Ability to respond. You could take it that way, but it's still words, so that probably doesn't go the whole distance. But to be able to respond means that you don't miss anything. If you're focused on one thing, you're going to miss everything else. Don't focus unless you need to, but make the focus come out of the awareness, so that anything you need to focus on comes out of seeing a big picture. Use a metaphor that only works so far, because pictures have frames around them, and a big picture I'm talking about doesn't have a frame. You can't hang it anywhere, and there isn't anywhere you can't find it. So it's always happening. Sokuzan.
How can we identify what's true relatively?
Just keep watching your mind. That's the way to see it. I mean, listen to this. This happens once, a couple times a week, or on book study, respond on book study. But the main situation seems to be sit down, hold still, and that's when you get introduced to your mind. That's when you actually begin to see the causes and conditions that have been tracking you down from beginningless time. Yes, I'm talking about the 3rd century AD. If you want to use that, but we don't need that. Everything's available right now. This is not my word. That's Trungpa's words. You don't need to go into some other kind of deal. Everything's available now. On the other hand, you may need to be trained. You may need some help in doing it. Yes.
You said that until you observe relative truth, you can't find the ultimate truth. Is ultimate truth something that can only be seen in juxtaposition of relative truth?
Not the juxtaposition is extra. That's a not ego language necessarily, but it's a relative kind of. It's a scientific kind of. You don't need it, not necessarily. More?
Can you elaborate on what you meant?
You need to ask me a question. I don't elaborate much.
Okay.
Well, I think there was that one time I elaborated. Wasn't there? Go ahead. I'm just saying, we have a lot of people here. Everybody needs to hear this in a different way. This is difficult to do, because if I were talking to you alone, I wouldn't be giving this particular talk because of what I know of you, which is a little bit. But if I were talking to someone else, it would be a different kind. So this is kind of a trying to do the best I can. That's why if I have your questions, then this talk will go deeper, because I don't give the talk. Your wisdom mind, when you ask a question, you show me your wisdom mind. Your wisdom mind, my wisdom mind, if we're going to use the me's mind and yours, are not two different things. You know, I can see it and you can't. Or you can see it and I can't. Not different. That's the hard part. That's the part where ego cannot get a credential out of that. Ego says, well, let's say it a little bit more clearly so I can be included. So ego can be included in the understanding. It needs to be an understander. Nope. Go ahead.
So then, can it only be seen when you compare
Speak a little louder, please.
Can it only be seen when you compare the two sides of opposites of relative truths, or?
No, it's all in relative truth. You don't have to look for absolute. You look for the absolute, then you're taking what is referred to with a relative word. Got to say something as absolute as something, and it's not, has no phenomenological status. It has no status. It isn't something. That's why it's called a spiritual path, not a mundane path. A mundane path can be highly fancy, exotic. We can get somewhere. We can build castles. We can tear castles down. We can do this, do that. We can stop doing this, start doing that. But death comes without warning. So it's very, very limited. It's called impermanence. If we were going to live forever, ever, I certainly wouldn't be here. I'd be out living forever. I'd probably be on the Adriatic Sea in a huge sailboat in the 13th century. Okay, 14th century. Do you follow that? Kind of a silly. I'm just saying it's because of impermanence we need to do this, my friends. Some will die soon, some will die later. Michael?
What is the difference between doing nothing with causes and conditions that arise and shutting down on causes and conditions that arise?
So I think it means that you've actually watched the relativity, and you're not going to do anything with it, even though some parts of it are threatening. Not going to do anything with it. This doesn't mean you don't run out of a burning building. I'm not talking about fire is hot, water is wet, earth is hard, wind. There's no opinions. Opinions don't work in that area because it's just relatively that. So I think there's gradations there depending. It would be a little bit different for everyone. Go ahead.
Is doing nothing pointing at non-action?
Somewhat. Go ahead. But what happens as soon as you do nothing? What does a self-centered mind do? It immediately starts commenting. Don't you think you should be doing something? You know, what would Jim think? Who's going and marching on Wall Street? Or what would somebody, or shouldn't I? It's all about self-centeredness, my friends, my enemies. Yes.
In the past 24 hours, we've had 2 mass shootings here in the United States, and it looks like there are over 30 people killed and many wounded. What is the action for us in that?
So the action is to receive that and so far as you can, without adding on, without going into some kind of rabbit hole of this is what we need to do. We need to get rid of this, make this law. Maybe we should, but we, go to the area where you actually have some say so. And it isn't necessarily voting. I mean, on the other hand, I would say, not saying don't vote, of course. We have to participate in the society we're in, but don't go for the throat of that and think that because you're so clear, that you can change it. Train your mind. Don't take your unexamined aggression and add it to the aggression with some kind of idealism that you're going to be the one who, at least you're participating. That's just ego fuel. On the other hand, and on the same hand, if you come and say, if you're a student of mine, if you're a monk, and you come to me and say, Sokuzan, I have to go to do this. I have to go participate in this. Then I will look at you and say, really? And if you say, yes, I have to go, then I would say, go. I won't stop you. So right and wrong is extra. You don't need that. What we need is awareness. Awareness about what as large a picture, frameless picture as we can have about the whole thing, so that any kind of spontaneous conclusion, shall we call it that you just come to, I need to do this. I need to do this. There's not weighing anything. It's not should I or shouldn't. If you say should I or shouldn't I, you need to go face the wall if you're a student of mine, or if you're even listening to this, which if you're listening to this, you're a student of mine for another 20 minutes. And then you do whatever you want, unless you've made a commitment to this path under my guidance. JD.
How much does humility play in all this?
Humility is a word that describes something that is that you can't experience. Others may experience you as being humble, but if you think you're humble, you're full of it. Yeah. So if you think you're humble, this doesn't mean that you might not be working on yourself and trying to be less. The difficulty there is that area is very, very difficult to understand, because what is the opposite of humility? Pride. And pride, of all of all the students I talk to, that's the one it's the hardest for me to point out, because people who have pride are very, very defensive of it. And without even really seeing it. So I have to have what the common word for it is, have patience with that, and not go in with some kind of a mental knife blade and say, you're full of yourself. You're full of yourself. Yes, sir.
Are there other situations besides pride that are easier to point out?
Yeah, because you can see them. You're angry, you're jealous, but pride, actually, the lamination of pride to the ego, to the self-centered, the seventh consciousness, is extremely it's so sticky that it actually looks like you. And if somebody comes at you and you start to feel offended, that's pride. Anytime you feel offended is pride. Anytime. If you think otherwise, you're wrong. Fight with me, argue with me, or ask Joseph. Go ahead.
Is pride the same thing as humility?
Not so. So if you think you're either one, it's called ignorance. Yes, sir.
How does pride show up in one's mind when there's not a feeling of being offended?
You're very good at that. You follow me a little bit? Or I'll talk and you'll listen. Good question. Sokuzan.
Can we see that we're in an awareness-free zone?
That's good. Probably not, because there's not any awareness there. But we might look back on it. The way it shows up for me is in phrase fillers, the word I use for extra words in a sentence that are that cause you to shut down temporarily, so you can continue to feel like you're saying something important. Like, you know what I'm saying? Those kind of things. So I'm not saying get rid of those. Don't get rid of them. Just be aware when you're talking and you're going along and you say, what was I using this morning? That was,
I mean,
yeah, I mean is a good one. Or look, here's the way. Here's the basic deal. If somebody says that to you, they're already saying, look. They're covering up their own eyes because they want you to look at their ideas about stuff. I mean, that's one. You don't have to stop it. Just be aware when you're talking. If you, probably half a dozen of them myself, which sometimes I'm aware of them, sometimes I'm not. Phrase fillers. Michelle.
How can we see the things that we are hiding?
So the way this happens, you could say progressively, it happens by just continuing to sit down, and insofar as you can, sit down and make the most important thing about your practice holding still and observing. So holding still, and it doesn't have to be for an hour. If your back hurts, get up. If your knee hurts, put your leg out. But no macho wading through that. That's just a misunderstanding about awareness training that has been propagated for centuries. You know, we think in the West, when we hear this from some kind of a Zen master or something, or some kind of a lineage or some kind of a thing, that we have to do that. This is a misunderstanding from the point of view of the way I see it, and I practiced for a while. Don't do that to yourself. Trust your intelligence. This is why in this monastery, people are required to sit long periods of time, probably longer than most monasteries, every day. Yet they're able to respect I respect their intelligence. They can get up and go to the bathroom. They can do walking meditation on their understanding, their awareness, and they can, have that aspect of it. It has a little softer, a little bit more accommodating to people's individual practice. Because if somebody comes in here in the first place, they're pretty serious about this. This isn't someplace you go to just for vacation. More?
Is that kind of another way of saying allowing space to let things surface?
If you don't turn it into a lecture, I mean, if you don't turn it into some kind of a belief. So I might change the whole thing tomorrow. The whole thing could change. Quite often it changes. More? Joseph?
I'm going to try and figure out how to put a hitch
What?
on my car, like
Wait.
a trailer hitch.
What?
I'm going to try and figure out how to put it on my car today.
Yeah.
And waking up this morning, I felt the need to try and fix the shootings.
Mm-hmm. So awareness of that is fine. We all have awareness. I often say, don't turn the news off. I mean, it's terrible, difficult. But move around in different channels and, receive some of it. But don't OD on it necessarily. If it starts to get too much, then turn it off. Go do something else.
So there's a difference between the fixing of the car, the impulse to do it, and the impulse to try and fix these big
I
problems.
think there's, you could differentiate. The car is something that is all of the material you need is there. It's a very simple, fire is hot, water is wet, threads get stuck or rusty, wrenches slip and you break your knuckles on the side of the casing. You know what I'm talking about. So those things are going to be there, but in taking something that is, part of our whole society, the causes and conditions that arise with your small project are similar. I mean, but there's more. You have a little bit more say-so about that, where you're not going to go to war with anything. Whereas when you enter into the whole society, culture, hundreds, thousands of years of culture, and people's training to be in control, to be happy, to be in the ways and buying into materialism and misunderstanding what spiritual practice is. Even in the spiritual paths, the ones that say that they're spiritual. I'm not saying they're not necessarily, but it can be very challenging. So there is a difference, and there are times when you would. But even in that situation, there's conditions are changing, fluctuating all the time. Time of the day, how much light you have on it. I mean, I could go into that, but you already know that. But the other situation is it's totally it's the spinning that's happening on the fixing the hitch is probably the spinning in your mind, and the spinning there is very, very similar. That whole thing is similar. But when you watch what's happened in Texas or Ohio, the spinning in your mind is not even close to what's happening in those two places, because you cannot track the causes and conditions in your own mind, let alone in the minds of millions and millions of people, thousands of people, hundreds of people who are dying. The news media and everything immediately go into trying to appear like they're doing something. Trying to appear like, well, at least I did this or did that. Misunderstanding. Train your mind. Train your mind. If you need to go do something else, then have it come out of your awareness, out of the receiving aspect of your mind, rather than just production. Constant production is the more you produce, the less you see, the less you at least have a gap somewhere where you just sit down and just receive for a while. So that when you do go out and run your mouth to your neighbor or to your best friend or to your spouse or to someone who asks you a question, and instead of just answering the question, you think they're really interested and really they're just trying to be friendly. So how's that meditation going for you? Fine. Wait, because they're probably going to start talking about something else. And if they say, well, does that help you? Then yes. And then there might be a gap, or they might go off and start talking about going to get groceries or inviting you to their picnic next weekend. Or it's possible they might say, well, how does it help you? Uh-oh. Then you have to respond what? Out of this. Don't respond out of this. Don't respond out of this. This is where it is. Respond out of that. And if you respond out of this, you won't know what to say. But if what you do say, if it comes from there, it might be something very simple, very low propaganda area. Just to give an example, don't use this, but just to give you an example. So it keeps me honest. Very, very simple. Then they might ask more about that and say, well, just, tend to lie to myself or tend to deceive myself. It's kind of hard to see that without doing some awareness practice. Don't even have to call it meditation. Don't call it Buddhism unless they go there. Preach nothing. Don't preach. Don't teach. Receive. And receive for 20 or 30 years, and then you might be ready to produce.
Is thinking producing?
Yeah. But it's okay as long as you're aware. It's fine to produce. We're human beings. We're going to think. We're going to produce, and we're going to receive. We're going to produce. It goes back and forth. Go ahead.
How can we just receive thinking?
Practice. So I've said before, and I'll say now, even though I've studied a lot and practiced a lot, I teach out of what I see. I teach out of this right here. I don't remember much. If you ask me, what are the different schools of Buddhism, I might be able to get a couple of them, but I don't remember much. then we're not interested in it. There's plenty of people doing that. There's books. Go read a book. So whatever you see, and if you begin to start, if you practice and train your minds to, so that you're, doing more receiving than you are producing, then you're going to get to know yourself. You're going to, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, you're going to make friends with yourself, because when you start to sit and face the wall, you start to not like what you see. Sound familiar? Notice how you can ask a question by going, if that means asking a question, what does this mean? Further questions? Shoto.
Is there a thinking that's produced that's different than a thinking that's received?
Well, simply put, it's you're producing thoughts. So if you're involved in the production, then may not be much awareness there. But if you're producing, and you're also very aware of the words you're using. It took me a long time to understand what Trungpa Rinpoche was trying to do back in the 70s, when he had classes in elocution. In other words, how to pronounce. And at the time I thought is he trying to get us to talk like the Brits? But no, he's trying to find a way, my understanding as of this particular time, see the misunderstanding that was coming out in language, and just the knee-jerk reaction of into the language itself. So you would notice things like phrase fillers. So you would notice them. And I don't know what he would say about it. He might say, nah, he missed the point. I wanted to speak like Brits. So maybe. Sokuzan.
Oftentimes after work, I'll feel frustrated or exhausted. And it seems like if I had been aware, I wouldn't have gotten to that point. Is that an indicator I was in an awareness-free zone?
Not necessarily. Causes and conditions behind anything are so extensive and expansive, and it's like the image I always go back to is the tributary streams flowing in the darkness. You can't track down cause and effect. You can see the immediate, but as soon as you see the immediate, then don't necessarily add on that must mean all this is wrong or off. So not necessarily. More. The conclusion's the difficult part. It isn't that there isn't something happening there, but let it conclude itself.
What if it doesn't conclude?
That's the conclusion. Anything else?
What's the difference between awareness and ignorance?
So, well, the obvious thing is this is ignorance, and this is awareness. So that's obvious. But something about the awareness also, because they're somewhat opposites, they take their meaning from each other. So going one direction or the other tends to going one, a claim about awareness is actually ignorance. So some kind of feeling like I'm much more aware. Probably not.
So if we're in an awareness-free zone, is that ignorance?
Mm-hmm. Say it the other way around. I'm waiting.
If we're in an ignorance-free zone, is that
Ignorance. Mm-hmm.
ignorance-free? What's an ignorance-free zone?
We don't know anything. There's no self, no other. All relativity has all adaptation or conclusion about relative truth has dissipated, to use more relative words. In other words, you can't see anything else. If you see something else, I'm not saying there isn't, shall we make up something, elseness? Is that a word? There's some kind of elseness going on. Otherwise, you'd be, you wouldn't see the boundaries. You wouldn't have respect for other people's confusion. You'd feel like we're all one. Let me show you how to be more happy, how to be more joyful, and all that romantic stuff. It's respect for again, going back to Trungpa Rinpoche, what was the kind of hierarchy, word for hierarchy?
Natural hierarchy.
Yeah, natural hierarchy. And natural, I would take it another way and say natural, which is somewhat natural hierarchy, but natural division. You know, trees don't have their roots in the air, except in South America, because they're below the equator. So natural boundary to be able to see, if you really see that there is no other, then you respect the boundaries that are dependently arisen. Don't go into somebody's territory without their permission. And this shows up on all levels. And it's, I could give a whole talk on that, or 3 talks, but I'm just saying you really are aware and you see people, not that you couldn't misunderstand signals, that would be possible too. We're not some kind of a omnipotent situation going on, but you actually understand that people need respect, not the kind of thing that they might call respect, but from your understanding, they need to be respected. Further questions? We have a few minutes. There's further questions.
Ignorance free zone, is that the dark as it's taught in Sandokai? Excuse me.
Probably. That we're going to definite images. In darkness, there's light, but don't look for it. Don't look for that light. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Don't look for anything. There isn't anything else. Don't look for anything else. Don't look for something else. There isn't anything else. In other words, and I hope this brings up some questions, but I'll tell you this was going to be a Dharma talk at one point, and it may still, but don't improve. Don't improve. It's a misunderstanding. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying, of course, you can't improve. There's relative truths happening all the time. So go ahead and improve, but don't make a big deal out of that improvement, because you don't have that much control about anything. You don't have much control to do other things. You don't have much control to stop other things. You have some. And if you're doing any of that at all, and it comes out of more thinking, fabrications and everything, it's probably a intensely materialistic approach to it, which may work for 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, or whatever, or maybe it's multiples of 4. And there's so many things that we it's not even ignoring. We just don't want to know about that. We don't want to know about the Enneagram. We don't want to know about astrology. You know, we believe Carl Sagan, amazing, a scientist who actually didn't bother to look into astrology. He just came to a conclusion about it because it's a circle of animals, the zodiac, or whatever reason. But he didn't look close and see that it's about cycles. I'm not trying to promote astrology necessarily. But if you don't know what the source of something is, and then go look for it. And if you can't find the source of something, then find somebody who can, or get some help. That's what this person is doing here. I know something, but I'm not an astrologer. But I've looked into it because in the 1960s, I was very curious about that. So I understand it as much as I need to know that it is the study of cyclic movement. Everything is moving in cycles, and they are incredibly complicated. And if someone calls themselves an astrologer, it's probably because they think they got it figured out. Yes.
Maria from Toronto asks, what are tributary streams?
Tributary streams, the idea, my understanding is that it is about a metaphor, an image. Like, you can find the mouth of the Amazon, one thing, but where does the mouth of the Amazon come from? tributary streams. You can't go down and accuse one stream of being the cause of the Amazon or the mouth of the Amazon. So it's just an intense metaphor, a strong visual metaphor for whatever you're experiencing right now. The tributary streams are unsearchable. What can you do? Look it in the mouth. Look right at what it is, and to stop abandoning with ignorance your feelings, your emotions, or whatever's happening here for something else that you think will help you solve this problem. Don't do it. And if you do that, then at least, take a canoe, besides food, take some awareness with you. Be an explorer. The biggest exploration there is on that wall or any wall, or sit down, hold still, find out who you are. Incredible. The whole universe is, to use a romantic idea, is waiting for you. You've been hiding out from who you are. Not an accusation, just an observation based on what happened with this person. Hiding out. Don't hide out. If you're afraid, good. That's how it feels to do this. Yes?
Ethan from New York says,
The comedian?
yes,
The actor?
go for the vote, not for the throat.
Motto manufacturing. I like that. Yeah, that would be. Yeah. But, and of course, as you all know, I'm not going to get too far into this, but as you all know, voting is, it'd be great if, what's the way it said, all votes should be counted. I don't know if that's happening. So maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that, but it's all we've got. So we pretty much have to do it. Try to protect people so they can do that when we've got a whole hierarchy of craziness. It's been happening, not just one person or two people in positions of power, but decades and decades. Way back, way back. We can't just blame everything on Reagan. Sorry. I slipped. It was a Dharma talk. I think it was his name. I don't know. He lived back in ancient times. Go ahead.
So how could we search those tributary streams?
Search the ones in here in your mind, and then you may get up and do something. But make sure that you're not taking what I've said many times: unexamined aggression, ignorance, passion, aggression, ignorance, pride, jealousy, greediness, up off the cushion and out into the so-called cultural, social, political, materialistic environment, and think you can do something about it. I mean, to try to do something about it, because all there is to do out there is join things, unless you want to start your own movement. It's difficult. It's very tempting, isn't it, to look at the whole difficulty and not feel like, how can I help? How can I do something to fundamentally? And other people may accuse you of turning into a vegetable facing a wall. Let them have their opinions. They have to have an opinion because that's what they operate on. You don't need opinions, especially opinions about yourself. Just knock it off. How do you do that? Sit down and notice that no matter what you think, it doesn't last. You're not going to notice that if your body, speech, mind complex, this whole downloaded consciousness into an apparent physical form is in moving. As soon as you move one arm, that all the awareness that could have been in observation has gone into that arm. Just a way of talking about it. Probably nothing happens like that. I could be proven wrong by science. I'm looking forward to that. Not really. One last, if there's one. You have one? No? Okay. Thank you so much. Train your mind.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our chant books. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway, and also the ability for you to give us some financial assistance online through PayPal, credit and debit cards. Thank you for your help.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-o-san, chi-fu, chi-son mu-sa-mo-ko-sa, mo-ko-ho-ja-ho-ro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.